Hello, hello! Welcome back to Brenda's Books. Thank you so much for coming back to listen to more of Queen Andraya. Today I promised you that I would give you the results of the poll that you took. This was a poll of 7 different options for potential bonus content on Brenda's Books. And you could vote for as many as you wanted. It ended up being a tie between the options of personal stories of Brenda that inspired fiction scenes and real people who inspired fiction characters. So since it was a tie, I suppose I should talk about both, and that will be very fun. The one that was a close second was an in-depth look at the world of the Island Kingdoms from Queen Andraya. Though perhaps I can figure out a way to do that later. I do want to make a book about that as well. Anyway, so there you go. I will probably start offering bonus content, my guess is in December, and I will give you more details about that in the future. So, without further ado, this is chapter 38 of Queen Andraya. Here we go. Chapter 38. After dark. Just as the door slammed shut behind her, Andraya knew she had made a mistake. She knew that Trayson would throw open the door again and shout through the Sami streets that she was a peacebreaker, resulting in throngs of men charging her to her death. Adrenaline pumped through her veins as she frantically untied Peanut with trembling hands. She only had to mount her horse before the attackers came, then she could get away. But her fumbling fingers could not loosen the crusted knot of the rope. She heard a nearby door open with a squeak. Her heart jolted as she flung herself onto Peanut's back. Her eyes darted to where the sound had come from, but it was just a dog who had been let out to do his business. And in a moment's time, it scampered back inside and the door closed again. Andraya's thumping heart did not slow as she stared at the front door of Trayson's home. Any moment now, she thought. Any moment he will come out and accuse me. But he did not come, even after several long minutes. Andraya's wild mind slowly melted into confusion. Then she smiled. Gadon must have convinced his father to keep quiet. What a sweet thing. Andraya led Peanut around the very narrow streets of the village as casually as possible, so the clopping of her hooves would not disturb anyone. Now that the threat of an attack seemed unlikely, Andraya was forced to face her new reality. She had nowhere to go to spend the night. And the chances of her finding Stefan in the dark, in an unfamiliar settlement, were extremely remote. She kicked herself internally. She could have been safe from the elements at Trayson's abode. But of course her pride took over and she insisted on leaving. Oh, everything would have been fine if I had just held back my questions until the morning, she thought. But what will happen to Stefan before then? Excuse me, miss. What are you doing on your horse after dark? Andraya halted Peanut just in front of a tall, wiry man. His frame barely took shape in the moonlight. He was flanked by a shorter, beefier man who rubbed his palms together with short, swift movements. Oh, I am sorry, sirs. I must have missed a turn. Andraya mentally grimaced at her slip of the word sir again. Who are you? Said the wiry man. I am visiting a friend. I will be off the streets in no time. Andraya nudged Peanut forward and around the 2 men. Suddenly a whip sounded and Peanut reared. 2 other men stood in front of her horse now, each holding a whip and a hatchet. You didn't answer the question, one of them sneered in a slurred voice. Who are you? The queen definitely was not playing this game again. She gauged the limited space she had to get around the formidable figures. She boldly pushed Peanut forward, but as soon as she did, another whip slashed, and Peanut reared again. With dismay, Andraya realized that the whip had been striking Peanut in the chest. Answer our question, missy, the man sneered again, or you and your horse will get taken down. Peanut reared once more, neighing furiously. Easy, girl, easy, Andraya cried. She rubbed her horse's head in attempt to calm her. I will tell you who I am. I am a lone visitor of your village who happens to be threatened by 4 men for no apparent reason. You haven't told us who you are. And you have not told me who you are, or why you feel it is right to whip my horse. I'm a Sami. I don't need to tell you nothing. And I am not a Sami, and I hold the same sentiment. The beefy man turned to the wiry one. She talks fancy and has a funny accent. You think she's the princess? I can assure you I am not the princess She stopped herself from saying gentleman. Then a man from behind grabbed hold of her leg. Get off the horse, missy. You're coming with us. His voice gurgled low. Then he hiccuped and belched loudly. He was drunk. Quick as a flash, Andraya elbowed him in the head with all her might, then kicked Peanut hard. The horse sprinted at a speed Andraya had never felt before. A man boomed behind her. Peace, Brett! Then he stopped abruptly. Andraya did not know why or how, but she did not look back. She had to get as far away as possible. The narrow roads seemed to help Peanut press forward in a straight line, and since the streets were void of people, her speed never slowed, even when she had to dodge the occasional water well. Andraya did not know how Peanut could run so fast in the dark. She herself could hardly see anything. In what felt like barely a minute, the lines of houses ended and Peanut's hooves pounded in a field of long grass. Andraya slowed her horse until she came to a stop. Peanut nickered and shook out her mane. Andraya patted her on the neck. Well done, girl. Andraya sat still as the throbbing pulse in her ears lessened until the night air was nothing but absolute silence. She peered back at the Sami village, which at the moment looked perfectly still and innocent. The irony, she thought. She shifted her gaze to her surroundings. 2 solitary coconut trees stood nearby. Andraya surmised how much shelter they would give her tonight, and what the chances were of a coconut falling on her head. She inhaled a deep breath and willed her heart to slow. She did not want to sleep. What she really wanted to do was walk around and memorize the houses and streets while no one was looking. Perhaps there would be names on some of the doors, and she could memorize them and pretend she belonged. Perhaps, if she waited an hour or so, those ruckus men would be gone. But the question still remained. Where was Stefan? Where would the Sami keep a prisoner? Her stomach soured when she thought of what he might be suffering. She pushed those thoughts aside in order to focus on the task at hand. But the thoughts still stung as they lurked at the back of her mind. What is your plan now, Andraya? A deep voice spoke from somewhere in the darkness. The queen jumped so high she nearly lost her balance in the saddle. This isn't as good of a hiding place as you might think, said the same voice. Trayson? Yes, it's me. You can't stay here. Somebody will find you. And what makes you so certain? Because I already have. Andraya clenched her teeth together and Peanut nickered. If you have come to take me away to your council or whatever you call it here, I will not come. And Peanut can most definitely outrun you. Trayson sighed. And now that Andraya's eyes had adjusted, she could see the outline of his shadowy figure. He ran a hand through his short hair. I am aware that a horse is faster than me, and if I were to turn you in, I would take you to our chief, but I'm not going to do that. Then why are you here? Trayson shifted in place. Is it not obvious? I want you to come home with me. I want you to be safe. I thought you said Sami was safe. It is. Unless you look suspicious, which you do. All outsiders look suspicious to you, do they not? Said Andraya. Trayson hung his head and fell silent for a moment before looking up again. Please, Andraya, if something happens to you out here, it will be on my conscience. What for? You do not owe me anything. Even so. Just then a cloud uncovered the moonlight completely, and Andraya could see Trayson's eyes. They looked sincere and earnest. They pricked her heart. Why did anyone who showed any kindness at all strip her guard away? I need to find Stefan, Andraya whispered. I know where he is. You do? Shh. Trayson lowered his voice even more. I will take you to him in the morning. Why not now? Trayson heaved a large sigh. You are used to getting your way, aren't you, Andraya? The queen chuckled softly. On the contrary, Trayson, I find it very difficult to get my way. Trayson chuckled too. I doubt that. At any rate, I can't take you to him now. If I get caught, I will be burned at the stake. Andraya's heart dropped. And I cannot do that to Gadon, he added. Andraya smiled at the thought of the sweet little boy. Is he the one who convinced you to come after me? No, Trayson said readily, but he was very happy about it. A wide smile flashed across the queen's face, and she could see by Trayson's eyes that he saw it too, as they smothered with a strange mixture of pleasure and sadness. He cleared his throat. Shall we then? Andraya swallowed hard and nodded. Trayson stepped forward and rubbed Peanut's nose with long, gentle strokes. Her ears perked up. May I drive her? It will look less suspicious that way if someone sees us. Andraya hesitated, and Trayson gazed up at her until she nodded. Then he jumped up in the saddle, took hold of the reins, and headed back to the village. The queen loosely put her arms around his waist to steady herself. Trayson walked Peanut along at a leisurely pace, in and out of the confined streets of Sami. They passed only one man who was outside. He sat in a rocking chair on his porch, with a candle in his left hand and a cigar in his right. He glanced up at the sound of Peanut's clopping hooves. Trayson nodded in his direction, but said nothing. The man waved and went back to smoking. As soon as they entered Trayson's humble home, a little boy plowed right into Andraya's legs and squeezed them tightly. Andraya crouched to Gadon's level and hugged him back. Gadon put his chubby little hands on either side of Andraya's face. Show me all your scratches, and I will kiss them better. Andraya laughed. No scratches here. Gadon grinned, showing several missing teeth. Then his brow furrowed. You have big lips. Trayson pulled the boy away. Give her space, son. Sorry, Gadon mumbled. Andraya smiled kindly at him. Do not worry. She stood and scanned the small room, which was fairly bright due to the several burning candles scattered around on the windowsills, mantels, and nightstands. I lit all the candles for you, Gadon cried, noticing her distraction. How very kind of you, said Andraya. She glanced over at Trayson, who had his back to her, fumbling with something in the kitchen. Do you forgive my papa for yelling at you? Gadon said. This startled the queen. Oh, Gadon, come sit down. Gadon obediently sat at the kitchen table. Trayson turned around and held up a bowl of strawberries. We never had our dessert. Would you like to join us? Oh, yes, said the queen, coming to sit at the table next to Gadon. Trayson sat across from them and started picking out the strawberries with his fingers, while Gadon did the same. Andraya just stared at them with curiosity. Trayson looked up at her. Do you not like them? Oh, I do. I have just never eaten them this way before. How do you eat them? Gadon asked, his mouth full of juicy red. Oh, well, this is fine. She picked up a strawberry and plopped it in her mouth. These are perfect. Trayson grinned at that. Then the three of them ate in delicious silence. So, do you, Andraya? Trayson asked in a low voice. Do I what? Do you forgive me? He kept his eyes on the strawberry in his hand as he spoke. Well, since you have opened up your home to me when I had none, I suppose I can do that. Andraya smiled warmly, and Trayson looked up just in time to see it. His cheeks turned pink. And I am sorry for what I said. When I get worried and stressed, my pride often takes over. Andraya laughed once. You and I both. My pride took me out of a warm home into a dark night with no place to go. Trayson inhaled deeply. I am so glad I found you. Andraya swallowed. So am I. Thank you. Trayson nodded and stared at her for a long moment. Andraya had no idea what it meant. It looked warm and curious and fearful all at once. Were you the one who stopped that man from calling me a peacebreaker? Gadon froze at the last word, and Trayson kept his eyes on the strawberries as he tossed another in his mouth. What do you mean? I ran into 4 men. I thought they were going to call me a peacebreaker, or at the very least come after me, but they did not. Trayson looked up at her then. I'm glad to hear it. What about the man who saw us riding Peanut together? What will he do? Trayson batted a hand. Max minds his own business. I hope so. I would hate for anything to happen to you just because you helped me. This time Trayson's stare was unmistakably warm. Andraya shifted with discomfort in her seat. Then his eyes dropped to his hands. So, Andraya, you said that the man you were looking for, Stefan, is it? He told Teska he was a prince from Daldria. Is that true? He glanced up at her once more. Andraya nodded slowly. You must care a great deal about him to risk your life like this. He would do the same for me. Are you two betrothed? Andraya hesitated, then slowly shook her head. How do you know each other? The queen had no idea how to answer that. Are you a princess? Trayson asked. Andraya bit her lip and shook her head again. Then Garin spoke up. Papa, you said that royalty don't care about slaves. But Andraya does because she tried to help them. The longer he talked, the more red juice dripped down his chin. Why do you think that? Andraya asked Trayson. He threw a hand in the air. Because they don't do anything about slavery. Sometimes they enforce it. Why do you think our village revolted all those years ago? Andraya's veins began to churn with adrenaline. Well, maybe those who do care have not had opportunity to help. Or maybe they just recently found out about it. Trayson sniffed. How could anyone not know about slavery? Andraya placed a flat palm on the table. What if Sandrian has kept their slaves a secret from other nations, and has bribed a Chaldrayan nobleman with a plethora of gold to keep it that way? What's a plethora? Garin asked. At the same time, Trayson said, Why would it matter to that nobleman? I am sure the Chaldrayan government is just as corrupt as the Sandrian leaders have been. But they are not, Andraya cried, her pulse rising. Chaldrea has never been a slave nation. There are just a couple of moles who are trying to make it that way. Trayson paused for a beat, and Garin said, A mole? How could a mole do that? Trayson interlocked his fingers on the table and leaned forward toward the queen. He spoke in a low voice. You are very passionate about this, Andraya. Why is that? Because I am the queen, she exclaimed. And you are accusing me of being pro-slavery, when the fact is, I am the truest abolitionist there is. Shocked silence swept the room, and for a long minute, no one moved. Trayson gawked at Andraya in disbelief. Garin's eyes bounced back and forth between the two adults. Then, in a high, squeaky voice, cried, You're the queen? Andraya nodded as she kept her eyes on Trayson. He blinked rapidly and shook his head like he had just come out of a deep reverie. Then he focused on Andraya and swallowed hard. You're the queen? He repeated. She nodded. The queen of Chaldrea. She nodded again. Garin began bouncing his big eyes again while Trayson gawked some more. He leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. I don't believe you. Why not? Because you don't look like a queen, he said in haste. I borrowed clothes from a commoner. Who? He said flatly. Maurice and Bopsy. She does have soft skin, Papa, Garin chimed in, reaching up to touch Andraya's face. Remember when you said only children and royalty have soft skin? Give her space, son, Trayson said, studying the queen's face. His expression grew soft, but he attempted to keep his guard in place. Why would the queen of Chaldrea come to Sandrian? Because one of my marquises sent my lady-in-waiting, who happens to be my best friend, on a slave ship to Sandrian. So I came to find her. Why would your marquis do that? Because he is corrupt, as you would say. But that does not mean the rest of us are. Trayson held her gaze. She could see that he was starting to believe her, but then he reverted back to skepticism. I thought you came here to rescue Stefan. Andraya took a deep breath, then spilled out a lengthy explanation of how she knew Stefan, without sharing their romance, and told him of the events that led to their departure from Chaldrea to Sandrian. Trayson blew out a slow breath and stared at his hands. How long have you been queen? A little over a year, and you never knew all of this was going on in your kingdom. The king never told me anything. Andraya felt a surge of anger rip through her heart. but she kept her composure and spoke calmly. I was never allowed to know anything business-related. Trayson looked up at her again, his guard completely gone now. He searched her face for something she did not know. How long ago did the king pass? It's been over a month now. Trayson's eyes swelled. Oh, I'm sorry. Andraya shook her head quickly. Please, you do not need to feel sorry for me. Trayson continued to stare at her and search her face. How did he die? Gadon asked. Trayson turned a sharp head at his son. Gadon, what have I told you about prying? But you've been prying all night, Gadon protested. Trayson cringed and flushed. Very true. I'm sorry, he said, glancing at Andraya. It is quite all right, she replied. I am beginning to understand a little more why your culture is so untrusting. Trayson opened his mouth to object, but closed it again. So how did the king die? Gadon asked again. Trayson frowned, but did not correct him. Andraya turned to look at the boy. Well, I cannot be certain, but the doctor told me that he ate too much pig too often. Gadon's eyes bulged. Pigs can do that? Andraya shrugged lightly. I suppose. Trayson stared at the table again, deep in thought. Suddenly he grimaced, looking embarrassed. What is it? Andraya asked. You live in a palace, and now... He opened his arms to the space around him. Oh, no, please, said Andraya. Do not worry about anything like that. Your home is wonderful. Trayson cocked his head. A royal who realizes the world is bigger than herself. You really are fascinating. Where did you learn this? Andraya smiled. I think I learned it from Stefan. He just sees people as people. Trayson shook his head. You did not learn it from him. I think he just shares your same, what do you call it? Sentiment. Then he gave her a wink. You were there, Andraya cried. How did you take care of 4 men? Trayson shrugged. It is not very hard to do when all 4 of them are so drunk they can hardly put one foot in front of the other. Well, thank you, she said softly. Trayson nodded, giving her another kind but sad look. Why did he look sad? Then the queen flinched as she realized Gadon had spoken the same thought out loud. Trayson flushed and gave Andraya a fleeting glance. I am fine, son. Now, considering our guest is a queen, do you think we should give her the bed tonight? Andraya did a double take. The bed? Oh, I could never. Yes, you can, Gadon and Trayson said in unison. Besides, Trayson said, standing in place and collecting the bowls on the table, you'll need a good sleep before you see the prince in the morning. He what? Well, Trayson stacked the bowls and did not look at her as he spoke. I can't be sure, but I don't think he will be in good shape. Andraya stood too and stared at him until he finally met her gaze. What have they done to him? Trayson frowned. I really don't know, but I will help you both. I promise. And that concludes Chapter 38. Thank you so much for listening to Queen Andraya, and I hope you come back next Thursday for more. Until next time, take care.